Homeownership is a bedrock of the American dream, but for too many Americans, that dream seems out of reach. Today, we talk with National Hall of Fame realtor and former North Carolina Realtor president, Maren Brisson-Kuester. Maren's business skills, determination, and humanity have made her a top producer in an industry now numbering over 1.5 million realtors. One thing about Maren, she's all in, and she wears her heart on her sleeve. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., another episode of 13th and Park.
We give you information, not a panic attack.
I mean, look what's going on. I mean, my God.
This was it. The kids were gonna die.
That time is gone forever.
This is the biggest story in America.
We weren't prepared for this.
Don't you want to speak truth to power?
Toughest thing I ever had to do.
So, Maren, great to have you on the show. I got to ask, there's a lot of legislation that's proposed to try to help housing availability and affordability in the entire real estate industry since, as you know, the real estate industry itself represents over 16% of the GDP of this country. One of the acts that's in play is something called the More Homes on the Market Act. Let me cue this clip and get your reaction.
The housing bill is picking up co-sponsors in Congress. It's called the More Homes on the Market Act, House Bill H.R. 1321. The bill was introduced last year. It slow burned to 54 co-sponsors, but more than a third have come on in just the last few weeks. The bill is meant to increase the supply of homes nationwide, but this is not a first-time homebuyer program. It is a tax bill reduction program for people who have owned their homes for a long time.
How important is that act? Because it sets out to put more homes on the market by allowing those who are in a home to have more financial incentive to sell the home they're in.
It's extremely important. I mean, it's what we need. We have no inventory, and we're going to continue to not have any inventory. I mean, we are at an all-time low, and that's not going to change. We are missing, 320,000 listings just in my area alone, if you're looking for phantom inventory. So that's incredible when you think about it. You multiply that across the country, right? So we do not have enough homes for people who live here. Plain and simple. We can't build them fast enough. That affects everything. That affects affordability. That affects schools. That affects communities. That affects everything across this country. So it's immensely important. And we actually have 56 co-sponsors right now. So this is huge, right? We have bipartisan support. But quite frankly, I don't see this going anywhere. It's not on the calendar for action. It's sitting in Ways and Means. We all know that means it's not going anywhere right now. And in fact, the administration has opposite plans. They've gone the opposite way. The tax plan right now is to double the capital gains tax. So with elections coming, we might see something change. I think that this is an extremely sensible bill. I think it's unfortunate that the president has taken the opposite approach at this time. I frankly wish I could get in a room with him and implore him one-on-one, because I don't honestly think they understand the real reality of what they're proposing.
What does it really mean, bottom line?
They are trying to double capital gains tax. So they will, in essence, keep the boomers in their homes. They should get their money out of their investment to retire on. Well, they're getting taxed on it. Well, now the proposal's out there to double that tax. They're not going to sell. They're not going to downsize out of their 4-bedroom home. Well, we now have the millennials, the largest buying sector we have in this country, trying to buy those big homes. They can't move. They don't have homes to move into that are big enough for their burgeoning families. So we're going to further propagate our inventory problem.
Right.
I mean, it's just a self-fulfilling disaster. And we're also talking about a generation that's sitting on a precipice, depending on where they fall, of what's going to happen with their Social Security benefits. I mean, it's just not a good idea for this economy or for this nation.
I want to ask you this question about interest rates, because you're talking about housing availability. From what you just described, Maren, seems to be more of a critical issue than interest rates themselves. But are you a Fed watcher? When Jerome Powell steps forward and says, here's what we're going to do or not do on interest rates, do you and other realtors kind of hold your breath knowing how directly tied they are to mortgage rates?
We might not be as much of a rate watcher as the lenders, but we're pretty close because we know how much it affects what we do in our day-to-day lives. But it's not just about the mortgage rates. It's about everything. It affects every part of our industry. And my dad actually retired when they sold their company. And then my mother, after 50 years of marriage, threatened to divorce him if he didn't go get a job. So made him come work for me. So now he works for me and thinks he's a real estate expert too. So now he understands this nuance. But we talk about it, how in the 80s, interest rates were double digits. And I love having this conversation with people who bought homes in the 80s, because then we start comparing actual data.
I remember, by the way, Maren, I was one of those people like your parents who were going through that period of life.
What was the price of your house?
Much lower.
Right? And your salary was too, but so was the price of milk. So was the price of gas. So was the price of education. So was the price of everything. So actually, when you go and compare the cost of living back in the 80s to the cost of living today, across the board, it cannot be compared. So when you look at people's debt to income ratios from the 80s versus today, you're talking over 70% of their income is spent on household expenses alone. That is incredible versus the 80s where it was less than half, oftentimes 20 to 30%. So when your interest rate was 18%, it was rough, but it could not compare to what you were spending today. So I don't think the rate staying up high is doing anyone any good. I don't think that's helping with inflation, candidly. And I think they probably need to deploy another tool in the toolbox other than hindering mortgage lending. However, I don't see that changing until after elections. So I think we're all treading water right now. And a lot of people are getting boxed out of purchasing homes because they cannot afford the monthly payment. And that's unfortunate.
Generally, the home is asset number one. It's the most valuable investment anyone makes in a lifetime, right? And yet we're making it more and more difficult to get there, especially for the younger generation that's coming up without the resource and facing lack of availability, higher interest rates, and the rest. If you own a home in this country, you're going to have 20 times more assets than renters. That is patently unfair, especially since we know renters tend to be people with less income, tend to be younger people. How do we start to level the playing field?
By affording people more rights to purchase and creating more pathways to it. By the way, it's not just generational. I mean, think about it. It's minorities as well. Fair Housing Acts exist for a reason. Home ownership rates are low. This is important. I have this pulled up. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. For 50 years, okay, after the passage of the Federal Fair Housing Act, home ownership rates for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, the LGBTQ plus community, and Asian Americans lag behind that of white Americans. So it's not just for the youngsters, although I think that's a real crisis that we're going to be dealing with, but it doesn't just talk to the young people. It's across all lines. And it's not something that we can just solve by saying people need to be paid more and we need to make things cheaper. Those are easy blanket statements to say, but I don't actually think they solve anything because one, you can't make things cheaper when it's somebody's greatest asset. That's actually not fair to just come up with regulatory ways to push down values artificially or dampen somebody's investment. That's not fair nor appropriate. So there's really no magic bullet out there. You have to get creative. You have to create real synergy and conversations between government entities and private entities. And I don't see that happening. I wish I saw that happening more. I can tell you it happens in communities. For example, Mecklenburg County, where I reside. We have a great program that they implemented a few years ago for teachers and firemen and policemen, real pillars of our society that cannot afford to live in our community, okay, with an average home price over $400,000, right? And we're in the South. Like that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot here. And it's like doubled in less than a decade. They're getting priced out. I mean, we have teachers that teach in our schools that drive an hour and a half one way to teach our kids. That's not right. Okay. So they worked really hard to come up with a program, public and private, down payment assistance programs. You work together to come up with a system to help. So there are ways that you can do it but we have to figure out a way to do it in a broader stroke. And quite candidly, I don't see that happening if you don't have realtors at the table, because we're the ones bridging those gaps and having those conversations, because we're involved at every level in our communities.
Real estate transactions, of course, as you know, Maren, you wear many hats. What are the many things these days that become issues, challenges that you have to help either buyers or sellers overcome to have a successful transaction?
I mean, house issues alone, right? I mean, we have inspection issues come up. You could have, I had a fascinating one the other day that there was a stream that happened to come up while we were at an inspection. That is a new one.
You
after
mean an
all these
actual
years.
A stream with water?
An
That
actual
suddenly
bubbly.
appeared.
So do you remember that old show, The Beverly Hillbillies? Do you remember that show?
I
Where all of a sudden it came gurgling up out of the ground when he shot it or whatever. He was trying to shoot a possum, I think. Well, it kind of came up like that out of nowhere. My inspector came and got me. He's like, you will not believe this. It was raining that day. And inspection started, no problems, normal inspection issues. All of a sudden, my inspector comes up and he's like, you are not going to believe this. You have got to come in the crawl space with me. So I kick my heels off, get my flip-flops on, because I always have them in the car so I can not mess up my nice shoes. And I go in the crawl space, dress and all. And lo and behold, we have our bubbling up little creek coming up underneath the house that only comes up when it rains and the groundwater is up high enough.
They're probably hearing, well, she's talking about streaming, like streaming Netflix or Hulu. There was an actual stream coming up through the floorboard, right? Yeah.
But who would have known? And no one would have actually known. Had it not been raining that day. So we actually got really lucky that it was raining that day. The sellers had never known that it existed and could never figure out why they had moisture in their crawl space. So we navigated through that with a lot of money in DD. We really all had an interest in making sure we figured this one out and how to deal with it. And we brought in all the proper vendors, and I got a geoengineer out there to try to figure out where the water table was and where it was coming from and can we deal with this. And we found a solution and a way to fix it. And my client still really wanted the house. So we navigated through that and we're going to buy it. And we have a way to deal with this problem. But then we have things that aren't house related, people related.
I remember you shared with me a month or two ago, Maren, a story about someone who was homeless. Can you talk about that story and why that fits directly into what you just shared with us now?
It was one that, I've just got goosebumps thinking about her still. It's why I do what I do. It doesn't matter what you make in this job. And by the way, we deserve our paychecks because anybody who works deserves to get paid for it. But this young woman had literally run in the middle of the night from home with her small children from a very abusive situation. She had the courage to take off and leave for her children. They lived in their car and then moved into a hotel. When she got a job, they lived in her car. I cannot imagine. I was a single mom with kids after I left my first husband, and not a dissimilar situation, but very blessed in an opposite situation in that regard. And I cannot imagine having to live out of my vehicle. And she did it until she got a job. You want to talk about a fighter? That woman was a fighter. And then she moved them into a hotel. And I don't even call it a hotel. That gives it too much dignity. She moved them into a motel. Okay. And she saved her money. That woman saved her money. And she couldn't save much, but she did it. And she was working at a medical clinic as a receptionist. And she had her kids enrolled in school because education was key for her. She did everything she was supposed to do. And she still couldn't save up enough money for a down payment, but all she wanted to do was own a home because she wanted somewhere for her kids to call their own. So we enrolled her in down payment assistance, education, in a program. It took her almost 2 full years, but she got through it. She did it, and she bought her own home. Now, it wasn't anything big and fancy, but it was theirs. And I'm going to tell you, there was not a dry eye at that closing, not one. And you know that there were many nights that she cried herself to sleep. So many nights that woman cried herself to sleep. Her children didn't, because she was their protector. But you know, she went to bed that night with tears of joy at her home. And that is why I do what I do. And by the way, those people are everywhere in our country. That is why home ownership is so important. Home is everything. That's why we have to do what we do. That's why I'm egregious, actually, about why, quite frankly, I think my industry is under attack. And I'm shocked by it because we do every day a service for our communities. We're not out here just shilling homes for a big paycheck and going home and spending it willy-nilly. We serve people like that. It's the American dream to have a home. And I just think it's the most important thing in the world.
When you think, Maren, about what would heal the country, what would bring us together again, because this has been a very difficult period for America, and it's not just politics, it's everything in life. Isn't this one of the healing remedies that if we could get healthy in terms of home ownership, if we can get healthy in terms of communities, maybe that will lift the ship that for too many years now seems to be listing?
I totally agree with you. I actually had hopes during COVID of that. I was leading NC Realtors at that time. And I saw for a short amount of time, of course, because like everything, it seems like these days it became polarizing quickly. But at the initial beginning, if you will, emerging of the COVID crisis, I saw such a unification of community where everybody just really unified against protecting each other, protecting our weak, our old, our innocent, right? No matter where you fell on it, by the way, on that spectrum, on what you believed, what you felt, at first, we all just cared, okay? I think one word trumps everything, care. It doesn't matter where you live. If you just care about each other and realize you're in a community, everything would change. And I think we've gone really far away from the center. And I think we need to realize that center is home. Center is not a political stance. Center is home. And it's safe. And it's where we all want to be.
The real estate industry, as we talked about earlier in this conversation, representing 16% of GDP, it's not a small part of the American experience. You feel good about what we could do moving forward.
I am anxious about what we are doing, but I feel great about what we could do. I think America, and I still believe this, that America is the greatest nation on the earth. I think we are the biggest risk takers. I think this nation was founded upon entrepreneurship, and I think it was founded upon faith. And I don't care what that faith looks like to you. It doesn't have to be religion. It doesn't have to be anything at all. Faith actually means faith in yourself. It means courage, right? It means all the things it took our founding fathers to actually take a leap of faith to start this nation. That's what faith means to me, right? Courage. We stand for that in this country. Look at us. Look at how many people own their own businesses here in this country. And that's what scares me. I actually think businesses, small businesses are under attack. And that's what I think we need to be careful of, because this country will fall in a mighty way if we attack our underpinnings and what makes us strong. So I think we need to continue to be innovators, continue to be a strong nation, and continue to take a step forward and be leaders. And we will rise and continue to be amazing, because reality is we are wealth builders in this country. We need to continue to build wealth. Whether any of us like it or not, the world needs money. That's what the world is built on, currency. So we need to build wealth, and we need to build it for generations to come. And yes, real estate is a really good way to build wealth.
Thank you very much for sharing your views on not just on real estate, but on life and on humanity. What you do is incredibly important. I can tell you I'm going to go home tonight with a greater appreciation of where I live. And I'm also going to go home listening to see whether or not I hear some water running that shouldn't be running, thinking maybe there's a stream coming up under my home, right? Keep helping a lot of people out there that need the help, not just of you and realtors, but a shot in the arm that the American dream is still within reach.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great, Adam.
Remember to subscribe today.
and hit the bell so you never miss another episode of the show with that trademark opener. From Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.